Hey guys, welcome to my first video essay, and this video I will be talking about Friends, my favorite television show. I know a few years ago I did a theory about The Breakfast Club, and most of you guys seem to really enjoy that. And you see, the problem with theory videos is that you need to know the subject matter you're talking about very well. Now, as much as I do know a lot about certain films, certain television shows, I really didn't have a lot of theories. Well, I did, but most theories I have, people have the same theories, and people have done videos on those theories and stuff, and I don't want to copy someone's theory and shit like that. That sounds just not exciting and stuff. And if you want to hear like good theories, watch like the Film Theorists or Super Carlin Brothers and shit like that. And again, I gotta talk about something that I know a lot about. So, yeah, Friends. That's an awesome show, right? Friends is one of my favorite television shows. I love this show with all my heart. And ever since I've been a kid, it has been one of my favorite television shows of all time. It's a show that has many cool theories and lots of cool Easter eggs and stuff. And I thought I'd love to just talk about this like a little fun little theory and stuff. And everything I'm about to say isn't completely factual. It's it's a theory. The theories aren't always proven correctly. It's just a theory, so bear with me. Now, this theory I'll be talking about is pretty much an alternate reality theory. It's pretty much a what if. So this theory is, what if Rachel Green never came to see Monica and never bailed on her wedding day when she was going to marry Barry? This theory is just basically, what if Rachel Green was never in the show Friends? Because the central plot of Friends is Rachel Green bailing on her wedding and basically the spoiled rich girl befriending all these people and her changing her life. She is basically, in a way, they're all the main characters of the show, but she's the one with the biggest arc, and she's she goes from like a spoiled rich girl to like a hardworking blue collar worker and stuff. And you see, this is very fascinating to me because if Rachel never shows up, the entire plot of Friends changes, and every single character in the show would all go down different paths. And I know they've done like a what if with like all the Friends characters and stuff, and with Rachel's, that is still, I'm going to be putting that as the same. Like, you all know the what if episode and stuff, but all those paths don't exist in this theory because those are what ifs for every character. But that what if for Rachel, that is accurate with this because she stays with Barry. But those what ifs are also like if Joey didn't get fired from Days of Our Lives, and Chandler quit his job, if Monica was still fat, and Phoebe took a certain job and stuff. So, and if Ross stayed with Carol. That doesn't apply to this. This is just Rachel not showing up in the show, and how does that affect every character in the show and their paths in the show. Okay, so let's start with Monica. Monica is my favorite female character, and she's a character who grows. She has a lot of growth in the show, and she has two very serious relationships in the show, and that is Chandler and Richard. You see, if Rachel doesn't come in the show, Monica would never end up with Chandler. You see, Monica only hooked up with Chandler because she was drunk in London when Ross was getting married to Emily. You see, if Rachel never comes, she never introduces Emily to Ross, and Ross doesn't get married in London, and if Ross doesn't get married in London, Monica never gets drunk and hooks up with Chandler. So Chandler and Monica never happen, which, yes, I know sounds depressing, but it is true. If Ross doesn't get married, Monica and Chandler don't become a couple. So if Monica doesn't end up with Chandler, then who the hell does she end up with? Well, the answer to that, of course, is the mustache himself, Richard. Yes, in the end of season 2, Richard and Monica break up because Monica wants children and Richard is too old to have children. However, in season 6, when Richard comes back, he says he wants Monica back, and he made a mistake, and he wants to be with her. Monica actually thinks about it because she thinks Chandler is having doubts about marriage and children. However, in the end, Monica chooses Chandler and breaks Richard's heart once he broke her heart, and now she breaks Richard's heart, but because she's with Chandler, and Chandler wants to be with her. Now, you see, if Monica isn't dating Chandler when Richard does come back and apologize to Monica, Monica will, of course, forgive him, and they will live happily ever after with each other. Yes, I know everyone prefers Monica to be with Chandler, but again, if Rachel never comes in the picture, she never ends up with Chandler, and instead ends up with her second love of her life, Tom Selleck himself, Richard. Richard is an amazing guy. Sure, he's no Chandler, but if Monica did end up with anyone that isn't Chandler, Richard is the next best thing. If Monica does end up with Richard, they probably get married, probably adopt some kids, live happily ever after, and stuff like that. But what about Chandler? What happens to Chandler? Chandler has always been a guy who's never really done well with the ladies. He's a very insecure person who uses sarcasm and comedy to help shadow the fact he's not always the happiest guy. Every relationship Chandler has had never really works out for him. Either women cheat on him or they're Janice. Yeah, I know many people might think Chandler would end up with Janice if he doesn't end up with Monica. But to people who think that, that's kind of wrong and bizarre. Janice was terrible for Chandler, and by the end of the relationship, Chandler couldn't even stand the sight of her and her annoying voice. So who does Chandler end up with? Okay, now hear me out here. There's a couple of scenarios for Chandler. He could end up with Janice, which is bloody unlikely, but hear this theory out. This is a long shot here. But I'm going to say he ends up with Wendy. Who the fuck is Wendy? Most people are probably thinking, who's Wendy? Wendy is Selma Blair's character in season 9, episode 10, the one with Christmas in Tulsa. So now let me explain this one, because most people are very confused and thinking, why the hell would he end up with her? You see, if Chandler was never in a relationship with Monica, he would still move to Tulsa, because in the beginning of season 9, Chandler falls asleep in a meeting, and he accidentally agrees to move to Tulsa. You see, this happens no matter what. Even if Rachel never came in the picture, Chandler still falls asleep during the meeting, because the reason he never got any sleep that night is because he was worried about falling asleep, and in cruel fate, he actually fell asleep, and he agreed to move to Tulsa. All of this would still happen to Chandler, but this time he isn't married to Monica, so I think he would actually just move to Tulsa. The only reason Chandler commuted to New York is because of his wife, Monica, and the fact she couldn't move to Tulsa with him because she got a new job. Now, since he isn't married to Monica, I actually think Chandler moves there for good. Chandler may have a lot of good friends in New York, but he's 30 and he doesn't have anyone in his life, so maybe he makes a fresh start in Tulsa. Now, as we know, when in season 9 on Christmas Eve, Chandler stays in the office with his coworker Wendy. Chandler wants to finish up work, but Wendy hits on him and finds him very attractive. Now, because Chandler isn't married, he's of course going to sleep with Wendy because she's hot. I know this is a stretch here, but I think Chandler might end up with Wendy because she's a very depressed person, and as much as she is married, but she's very, very unhappy, and I think she just wants to be loved. I think Chandler is the person to actually give that to her. Chandler and Wendy are both very sad and troubled people with troubled pasts, and I think they could maybe start a relationship. This relationship is nowhere near as good as Monica and Chandler, but it's an interesting alternate reality. Another theory is that he just stays living with Joey. He just stays with Joey, and they just kind of live out their lives together as like two bros. All right, now Joey's interesting because what happens is Joey, if Rachel never shows up, is not a lot. Because yes, Rachel was in Joey's life. She dated him. They were friends. She even lived with him and stuff, but she would never live with him if she never lived with Phoebe and burnt down her place. But I don't think Joey changes. Like, yeah, he could end up with like a Janine or somebody. I don't know. But I think Joey is always going to be the ladies' man. He's going to stay the same. Joey's life doesn't change, really. Either he's by himself as a ladies' man or he stays with Chandler and they're both just ladies' man. They're two bros. And so I don't think Joey's life changes all that much. All right, now it's time for Phoebe. You see, when it comes to Phoebe, I actually think she's the only person who ends up with the same person in the end of the show. Paul Rudd himself, Mike. Rachel doesn't affect Phoebe's relationship or job. The only difference now is that Phoebe doesn't live with Monica a second time because her place doesn't get burnt down by Rachel. Now, the reason she still ends up with Mike is because Joey's the one who finds Mike for Phoebe. Even though Joey might have a relationship or whatever Joey's up to now, eating sandwiches, I don't know, he still finds Phoebe Mike. She asks Joey to find a man, and he finds Mike. I know some people might think Phoebe ends up with David, I don't think David would end up with her because he leaves for too long and he kind of messes up his chances of being with Phoebe. Now, I think the same outcome happens to Phoebe, meaning she dates Mike and they break up, but then they get back together because Mike realizes Phoebe is the one for him. Yes, I know Phoebe and Rachel were good friends, and Rachel helped Phoebe out with a lot of things, but I still think Phoebe's life still ends up in the same direction and ends up with Mike. I think Phoebe is the only person's life that does not change. Now, lastly, I'll be talking about Ross. This is the biggest change because Ross's relationship with Rachel was the biggest thing in the entire show. Now, if Rachel doesn't come into the show, who does Ross end up with? Well, for me, this is easy. I think he ends up with Julie. In the beginning of season 2, Ross starts dating Julie, and she seems like the perfect person for Ross. The only reason Ross breaks up with Julie is to be with Rachel. So if Rachel isn't in the picture, of course Ross will stay with Julie and probably marry her because, it's Ross we're talking about. He marries everybody. I think if Ross marries Julie, I think this marriage would be successful because he's not rushing into it like he did with Emily, and he's not drunk in Vegas like he does with Rachel. Julie was a woman he had a lot of things in common with, and I think their relationship was super strong, and it never became toxic. Ross would also stay in his original apartment, and he would never get fired from his job because all that was because of Emily and the stress she caused him, and him saying the wrong name at the altar. It caused a lot of issues with Ross. Being with Julie would actually be very nice for Ross because they have a lot of things in common. And I think they would have a very beautiful friendship, marriage, and everything. And I think they would even have kids together. And I think this actually, believe it or not, would be better for Ross than Rachel and Ross. I know everyone loves the Rachel and Ross and stuff, but I think Julie is the best person for Ross. Unpopular opinion, I know. It's very unpopular. But I genuinely think she is the best person for Ross. That's just me. So that's my theory on the Friends characters and what their lives would be like if Rachel never left Barry and never came into the show and never ended up living with Monica. And I know some people might think, like, oh, what happens to Rachel? Does she stay married to Barry? No, she doesn't. As we saw in the what if scenario, Barry probably cheats on her. And Rachel's what if is a lot more difficult to to predict because if she never comes into the show, we have no idea what her life would be like. She'd probably be like a very spoiled rich girl who survived off her daddy's money and stuff, and I don't know who her friends would be and who she even end up with. Some people would be like, oh, if she doesn't end up with Ross, she ends up with Mark or something. But no, that's not the case because she would never gotten the job at Bloomingdale's and ever met Mark. So I don't know who she ends up with, but I don't think her life would be good. I think it would be a very dark path for Rachel because Rachel coming into the show and meeting all these people changed her, made her a better person, made her a worker and actually fend for herself, made her the best she could be. Being with Ross was the best she could be. Being friends with Monica and experiencing all the things in the show changed Rachel for the good. So if she never comes, her path is not very good. And it's almost like her sister Jill. That's basically what Rachel's life would be. Just being a snobby rich girl surviving off her dad's money, which is not good. So let's just be thankful Rachel left Mary at the altar and came into the show and changed the lives of these great people. So anyways, thank you for watching this video. If I got some facts wrong, I apologize. And if you don't agree with this theory, that's perfectly fine. That's what the comment section below is for. In the comments below, please tell me what are your thoughts and opinions on this video. And if you want me to do more theories on Friends or just theories on movies, please let me know what you want to hear, what kind of theories you want to hear. Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, join the dark side, guys.